Welcome back, Quarantimers. Jack from Conductive Music here with an in-depth look at how we can give our synthesizers a little bit more personality when we're working with them in SoundTrap. Let's go straight to the track I've been working on. So let's head over to add new track, and we're going to look for our synthesized pad sound. So give that a click, go down to pad, and we'll just use the first one at the top, which is absolutely fine for recording in our major sevenths. Today we'll mostly be using major seventh chords to compose with. So let's go back to SoundTrap and see how we can input these. On the computer keyboard you'll be looking for the keys Z, C, B and M. That's going to be your first chord, and we're going to try to record it for the total of a bar and then leave a bar or two just to let the reverb trail go off. Okay, let's have a go. Our next major seventh chord is going to be F major 7, and that's going to be the keys of the keyboard of V, N, comma and Q. So let's go ahead and do the same thing with that one. And to get to our last chord, I'm going to ask you to go back to the first one we had and literally just go one note up each. So I'm just going to put these in ascending pitch order. So if I swap these last two, I think we'll have that. And let's just quickly listen. Let's go and give it a save, and then what we're going to want to do is we want to export this whole thing as an MP3 to our desktop. So we're going to go File and click on Export and Export Project to MP3 file. Okay, that step was quite straightforward, but now what I need you to do is find 6 or 7 different sounding synthesized pad voices in SoundTrap. Once you're happy with a voice, export the chords and save them to your desktop, giving you 6 or 7 different sounding sound files. So once you've saved your tracks with the different individual voices and put them back into the program, you'll get something that looks a little bit like this. Let's just hear what they sound like all together. Okay, so these files I've actually made earlier, but ostensibly the same thing because we have our first major seventh chord, the second and the third one there. I know that's not a major seventh chord, but we're using it. It goes nicely with this one and this one. So we're going to need to start dividing this up. Let's move our playhead across to there. I'm going to select them all and then Command and E, which should separate. I'm going to do the same for this one as well. Select, Command and E. Now let me move all of these out. The next task is to increase your tempo to 180, which we do like that. To start subdividing this first chord, I'm going to need to be a little bit more zoomed in, so I'm going to zoom in until I get 8 sections here, until basically we can divide this first bar into quavers. And the very important thing is you need to have this turned on, which is your snap to grid as well, so make sure that's turned on. If you can see, each of these ticks across is worth a quaver, because totally from bar 1 to bar 2 we have 8. So that would make sense because we have 8 quavers per 144 bar. So if we go to this first quaver division here, what we're going to do is I'm going to highlight all of them, and I'm going to use my little shortcut, the Command and E, to separate them. I'm going to do that the same for each and every quaver division, just making sure that I do keep that snap grid on, and then you can join me in a second. Now we have all the samples to play with, I'm going to try to create as much variety within one line as I can. So anything that doesn't have much signal that we can get rid of, because that's not going to be particularly useful. I'm going to start mixing these up within one of our parts. So let me drag this first lot out a little bit to give us room. And now I'm going to be fairly random, but I'm trying not to put two of the same sound next to one another. And also I'm going to try to sort of mix the smaller size samples with the large, because that will actually give us some nice bits of variety. I'm going to repeat this process until I get as far as bar 8, and in which case you can join me then. If you get to that point and you have a few left over, no problem, you can just delete them. It's not going to cause too much problems. Right, let's have a listen to this. Hear how we've created a lot of variety just within one synth voice, just by mixing up all of those different samples. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because this bit is a bit fiddly. I'm going to repeat exactly the process I've done for the other 2 sets of chords, and so in total that will give me 3 sets of 8 bars in total for the chords. I'm then going to burn this as a complete track and re-import it into SoundTrap. I've deleted the tracks that I no longer need, as it was just one file, and what we should have is our first chord up to the start of bar 9, then our second chord, and then our third chord. I'm going to start working with this track in 2-bar sections. So I'm going to divide at every 2 bars. I'm just going to click on it and use my Command and E to chop it up again. Next, I'm going to move the order of the chords around because I want to primarily be using our first chord, which is the C one, and the F one. So if I move those out a little bit, maybe I have to zoom out to do this as well. That's the last one. Now we're going to start to use a few more tracks, so let me just go ahead and duplicate these and twice, and then I can just delete the information off there because I don't need that. This is our first chord, and then we're going to have our second chord there. So that was actually our last chord, wasn't it? And then that's technically our second one. I think I'm going to want to have 2-bar phrases of alternating C and F. So let me start making that now. So just by moving these patterns around. So I've got C1, then they've got an F. Then I'm going to have another C. Then let's have an F. Let's have a little listen to this, but let's just have a quick listen to that. Then I think we want to bring in our D chords. Let me move all of these down to the lowest one. And let's have it go back from D to F maybe. Let's drag these across, so they're not playing at the same time. And then maybe we'll bring these 2 from the middle back over. So I'm going to Option and drag them across. And let's have our final C one there. And then maybe we'll just put these 2 last D ones as a sort of little coda to the end of it. Now at the moment this track is sounding a little bare, but let's add some of the loops available within SoundTrap to make it sound a lot more interesting. So we're going to add one, and I found it before. It's called Bring It, and it's really good. It's really going to suit this type of music. So I think I'm just going to drag the first one on there, and I'll just use that for maybe for our first beat, maybe for when it goes to the D chord there. I'll just use 1 beat of that, and maybe I'll bring my chord back onto the first one there. Let's copy those 2 across like that, and we'll have this again then when it comes in later, which is our first one, and then maybe put our second one back under there as well, just for when I'll leave the end. I'll leave the end open. Let's have a listen to how that sounds. Okay, so that's the first trick within SoundTrap. For our second trick, let's try adding a lower line to our track. Our second synthesizer tip and trick, we're going to use a synth voice called Sweep Repeat. Now that's actually a rhythmic synth. So let's go and find that under the rhythmic synth section. I think it's just Sweep and Repeat. So give it a click and let's have a listen. Now the thing you'll notice about this is it's actually already in the tempo of the piece, which is 180. So let's just see how that works at the moment. Now first things first, that's far too high for what we want. So let's click on this octave button. Let's stick with that one for the moment because that's quite a nice low sound. Now we're going to go to a place we haven't actually been before in any of these tutorials, and that's over here when you see the button tweak. So give it a click and see where it takes you. Now these effects are very, very useful if you want to change the sounds of the synthesizers. This looks pretty complicated, I know, but don't worry. What we're going to do is just going to make small changes to one or two items here so that you can hear how that affects the overall sound. The first thing I'm going to recommend that you do is come across here to Oscillator. That's what that OSC stands for. Oscillator 2, and at the moment that is set to a saw wave. Now we're going to actually make that into noise by clicking on it until I see the word noise. Now let's hear how that's affected the sound. Secondly, let's increase the filter cutoffs just so you'll just hear that a little bit better. What that's done is, rather than have the oscillator set to a sound wave, by introducing noise to it, it actually sounds very much more percussive. Let's go ahead and add some equalization as well. Now unfortunately this was set on taking all of the low end off, and that's not what we want at all. So let's in fact raise those up a little bit, and now let's have a little listen to the sound. Now let's hear how that sounds in the overall track. So to make the bass line for this, I'm literally only going to be using the root note of these chords here, which was C, F and D. And on the keyboard, they're represented by Z, V and X. Our final trick uses another rhythmic synth to add an upper part to our track. Let's have a listen to what effects the tweaks will have this time. So to add our upper voice, I'm going to go across here and we're going to look for the rhythmic synth called Pump Pad, I think it was. So down to rhythmic synth, and there we go. Let's have a listen to what it sounds like first. Like last time, let's go ahead and look at tweak, which we haven't actually done before, apart from the last thing we did. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to change this coarse pitch. We're going to put it up 24, which is 2 octaves, which will give this nice high sound. Also, let's make the mix just oscillator 2, so drag that right to the bottom, and we're going to increase this cutoff here just to give it a little bit more bite. Can you hear how it's like phasing in the tempo of the music? And so we can use that to really make some nice sounds at the top of this. As well as that, I'm going to fine tune it. Now listen to what happens if I just hold this down and increase the level of fine tuner. Can you hear it getting slightly sharper? If you make it a little bit, if you put a bit of sharpness on, what it'll do is it'll just stick out a little bit more in the mix. So that's a good tip as well, to try to use some of these fine tuners as well. So without further ado, let's go back to the track that I started with to have a listen to some of the effects I put onto it. So I'm afraid we've come to the end of the session today. Thank you so much for joining me. I really hope you've enjoyed having a little bit more of an in-depth look at the synthesized voices within SoundTrap. As ever, take care of yourself and stay safe.